Hey there, Wargamers, Justin our Painter here from Death Designs, and today I'm going to be showing you guys an alternative way to approach power weapons. Now in our previous tutorial I showed you guys how to do this with an airbrush. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do it without an airbrush at all, and I think the effects are awesome and hopefully you will too. The piece we're going to be applying our power weapon effect to today is a power axe from the Sanguinary Guard kit. And I've went ahead and done some dry brushing and so forth to get it in its current state. If you're interested in how I did that, please check out our previous tutorial on how to do dry brushing for weapons. In addition to the stuff I covered in that tutorial, I went ahead and added a little bit of a edge highlight with some brighter silver here on the side of the axe, just to get it ready for the power weapon effect. To get started with our tutorial today, you're going to need a few paints. First and foremost, you're going to need a white. In this case, I'm using Model Color Foundation White, but any white you have will do, so long as it is a nice white you're comfortable with. We're also going to need a blue of some sort. A pale blue will work, but in this case we're going to be using Montana Cyan. I really like Shock Blue Light, but this is what we've got at the shop. I'll be using that. Whatever blue you use, you want to make sure it goes well with your white. You don't want the blue to be so bright that the white doesn't show up well on it, but these two work well. And finally, for the last paint we'll need today, we're going to need some Minotaur Ghost Tint Plasma Fluid. This really is the secret sauce for making this effect work. You could use some other kind of candy coat or glaze, but this is the paint that I favor. Now, in addition to the paints that we've described, we are going to be using a matte varnish before we get to the wash step, because this particular paint here will reactivate just like the ghost tints that we've used previously, so we need to seal that up. If you don't use the ghost tint plasma fluid or any of the Montana paints, you may be able to skip the matte varnish step. For our first step here, we're going to come in with our Montana Cyan by hand with our paintbrush and start hitting all the hot spots and hand painting in our lightning arcs. When applying this, make sure that you keep in mind that we're going to have to come in later and put a white streak down the center of these lightning bolts and arcs that you're creating. So make these a little bit thicker than you might think you want, knowing that you're going to have to come back in with the tip of your brush and put a highlight or a hot spot in them later. If you do these too thin, it's going to be really hard to get in there with that white. Now, additionally, if you've watched our previous tutorial on how to do power weapon effects with an airbrush, you will note that the lightning arcs we're applying by hand here are similar to the exact same thing we did with the airbrush, except these are a little bit more crisp and sharp versus the airbrush applying a more gradient or faded style lightning effect. Try not to get discouraged while applying these lightning bolt effects. You will get better at it if you don't nail it the first time. It takes a little bit of practice to get there. Also, it is worth noting that we're applying the first color here, and that this is not going to look like the end result. So don't get discouraged by the way it looks right now. We've got a few extra steps that are really going to pull this all together. We just have to start at the bottom layer and work our way up. With our blue lightning streaks now applied and dry, it's time to move on to the next step, where we'll be applying some white. For this step, we're going to be coming in with our white paint and applying hot spots inside the lightning bolts we created previously. We're also going to be hitting the coils that emanate the lightning effects on the blade, and essentially just hitting the hot spots and high points all together. This is why I mentioned previously, however, to make sure that your blue arcs were wide enough that you were comfortable enough to come back in with a paintbrush and apply these white arcs. So as we begin to apply these white areas to our blade, I'd like to remind you guys to be patient with this, go slow, and remember that less is more, and you can always come in and add more paint. You don't want to come in here with an overloaded brush with a lot of white and drown out everything. You want to make sure when you're applying these that you're allowing some of the previous blue to show through, because it's going to help give a transition between the blue and the white and help give a gradient, which is going to help sell the power weapon / lightning effect. In order for the bright spots to appear brighter, we need those other colors to be the dark spots, because those are going to help push that contrast. The application of the white paint really pulls this together. Applying that white color to the coils, the lightning arcs, and the edge of this blade really enhances the depth and adds some hot spots, some awesome arcs into the lightning. And this would be perfectly fine for tabletop standard if you wanted to stop here. We're not, however, because I like to do things death ray difficult, so we do have several other steps to apply to make this really look awesome. However, before we get to that point, we do need to drop a matte varnish across this blade because that Montana paint will reactivate if it gets wet, so we're going to go ahead and seal that up and move on. With our matte varnish applied and dry, it's time to come in with our Minotaur Ghost Tint Plasma Fluid. We're going to apply this across the whole blade. It's really going to pull things together. We're going to apply this Ghost Tint Plasma Fluid kind of like a glaze or a wash, and you can move it around just like you would a wash. If there's pooling in an area you don't like, you can sop it up with the capillary action of your paintbrush and so forth. And also, one interesting trait with the Ghost Tint Plasma Fluid is you can thin this down with some water or some matte medium or matte varnish and get interesting transitions or interesting blue effects based on the intensity that you want. So feel free to play around with this if this particular color blue that I have is not the exact hue that you would want. And there we go, with our Ghost Tint Plasma Fluid applied, this is looking really good. Now, just like with the previous step, if you want, you could stop here. This would be great for tabletop or tabletop plus standard, but as I said previously, I like to go above and beyond, so we have a couple extra steps before this is done. For the next step, we're going to come back in here with our white paint again, and we're going to address all the hot spots we did previously one more time. Now, one major benefit of the Ghost Tint Plasma Fluid is it does bleed, so it's going to interact a little bit with this white and give you these interesting gradients and transitions without having to actually blend anything. So we're going to come in here, focus on those hot spots, again, tracing those lightning arcs like we did before, but make sure you leave some of that previous blue showing through. We're also going to go in and trace the blade and go back over the coils with a little bit of white to make those pop and look hot as well. Alright, with a little bit of movie magic, the first half of our blade is now complete. We just have to flip this over, transition, and start doing all the same effects on this half as well. Remember, be patient. Make sure you're focusing on those high points. You're doing really thin areas because you want to make sure the blue is showing through. Remember, the blue dark areas are going to push the white areas at the top and help give that depth. And with the white portions of our blade now applied, it's time to come in for the next step. We're going to go ahead and hit this with a matte varnish. This step is essential because it's going to seal in everything we've already worked on. In particular, it's going to seal that ghost tint. As I mentioned previously in this tutorial, we were utilizing the bleeding effect of the ghost tint with the paints that we were applying, specifically the white, because it kind of bleeds and helps it transition and blend. In this case, we want to go ahead and seal it so that we can come back in for one final highlight of white to really push the high points on the blade. And if we do not seal up this ghost tint, we may kind of just blend into the previous color and not get that stark white that we want. With our matte varnish now applied and dry, it's time to come in with that white one last time and hit all the high spots for the final highlight. Now we're focusing on the extreme hot spots here, so the tops of the coils, the edge of the blade, and the high points in the lightning arcs. You don't want to go over everything, and again, just like with the previous steps, you want to make sure you leave some of the previous colors showing through, because we're building this transition from dark bluish areas to this really bright white, and that's going to push the depth and make the light source look like light and give us these really awesome lightning power weapon effects we're striving for. Now that our last layer of white has been applied, the only thing left to do for this piece is to paint the armor here, of course, the binding, and maybe even address the gold up here at the top. I think this is a really awesome looking power weapon effect we've done without the use of an airbrush, other than applying our matte varnish, of course, which you could do with a rattle can, but all in all, a very good looking effect with the minimal amount of time invested, and I'm confident you guys can do this too. Alright, with our paints and varnish now dry, I think this piece is complete. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ding the little bell so you get alerts when we put up new content.
If you have any suggestions, ideas, critiques, thoughts on what you'd like to see us work on in the future, maybe it's different techniques, different miniatures, things like that, or maybe you just want to interact with us, make sure you sign up in the comments below. We're committed to improving, making sure we're putting out the best possible content we can, and who better to let us know what we can do to improve or what you'd like to see than the people hanging out and watching already. If you happen to use any of these techniques on your miniatures and you want to share those with us, make sure you check out our Facebook group, the Tap Garrison. We'd love to see what you're working on. We'd love to share in your hobby goodness, and you'll be able to interact with the whole Deathray Designs team, as well as other like-minded individuals like yourself who enjoy painting and gaming. If you'd like to help support the channel, make sure you check out deathraydesigns.com. Anything you do over there helps keep the lights on, helps keep me employed so I can continue to produce content for you guys, which I love to do. I'd like to thank you again for hanging out with me during this tutorial. I hope you've had a good time and learned something. And as always, happy wargaming, keep on painting, and I'll see you during the next video.